Tunnel Rat by the Walrus King. Please support the story on Royal Road, link in the description. Read by Homebrew Audiobooks. Don't forget to subscribe for further releases. We hope you enjoy the show. Chapter 11. Real-world problems. Logging out did not go smoothly for Milo. He had expected to immediately leave the game and wake up in his pod. Instead, he seemed to be back in the tutorial again, in the room where he had selected his character. The old man who had been tutoring him was standing patiently in front of him. Welcome, traveler. Our apologies for the inconvenience, but there are some irregularities that are interfering with your logout process. Milo couldn't bring up any options, couldn't log out. But he had things to do. He should have been running a check on the wastewater pipes going to the recycling unit today, and then going up to the level below the roof to check a connection to a solar power array that looked like it was on its last legs. Oh, no worries. I'll handle it on my end. His tail was connected to both the pod and his normal systems. He simply shut down the connection to the game from there, opened the pod, and got out. Time to get to work on a few things. How the hell did he do that? Sydney was banging her fist on the table, and frantically running scans on the player she had just lost. The player who they needed to talk to. The player who absolutely should not have been able to log out of the game on their own. Dr. Stephen Duran was looking over her shoulders. Wally said he was slippery. Somehow, while in character creation he bypassed the normal system and selected something that wasn't on the normal menu. Samantha was in the role of his tutor then, with Wally looking on. Sydney sat back in her chair, folded her arms and glared at the screen. And then he dumped the problem to us poor flesh and blood people. Why didn't the big bad supercomputer solve his own problems? Stephen got 2 cups of coffee, dumped 4 spoonfuls of sugar into one, and sat that one in front of Sydney. She grabbed it, and drank down most of it immediately. Stephen slowly sipped his black coffee, wondering again when Sydney would finally spontaneously combust. Because of the rules, Sydney pouted, upset at being outsmarted by the player. I hate those rules. If you have a massive quantum computer, why not let him do everything? He built the game, why does he have to stay hands off? He did set up the game, and generated the world. For us it was a week, but Genesis evolved for the equivalent of 500 million years before we slowed it all down and added players. He watched it all evolve and guided it a bit. But he doesn't want to play God in the world, and the corporations want limits on him in the game. So, we have human admins, aided by some very smart sub-intelligences in the game that are set up to monitor everything. Wally is working to shut down the illegal connections from outside. We get to try and catch up to this player, or others, in-game. And I'm not surprised this one is slippery, once you learn about him. Sydney finished her coffee, even the slurry of sugar at the bottom. What is special about this one? Stephen transferred files to her. We only know about this person from the medical records the pod is sending over. Tell me what you think. Sydney scanned the records, then looked at them again, then a third time. Oh my god. That is not normal. This guy is like something out of a bad movie. Those ports are directly fused to his spine, they removed a lot of bone to do it. Who the hell does that to himself? No one. That work was most likely done before he was born, with more operations several times in his first year. His nervous system was also subjected to a process that replaced most of it with some interesting biotech. If it was done when he was older, he'd be crippled or dead. His growth rate has been slowed, and many of his biological processes are not normal. Sounds like you're familiar with this. You've seen it before? Stephen had a momentary bit of anger show on his face before he controlled it. I read the reports, but didn't see the bodies myself. Nearly 30 years ago there were raids on 3 illegal biotech operations doing similar alterations to children. All of them died within the first year. There were records of a 4th group of 25 children that they had succeeded with. The unknown client paid off the labs and took the children. The labs were discovered months after that. When the authorities raided them, they found dozens of the failures preserved for study. They planned on continuing, after they acquired more newborns. Life in the habitats is hard. Someone offers to pay you a lot of money for a crippled child, some will take it. Sydney sat back, stunned. Wow, what assholes. So, what was their big plan? Stephen shrugged. The lab was just making money and trying to perfect the process. The unknown client took all the data on batch number 4. This player, Milo, is the first lead to what happened to the others in over 2 decades. Also, the only clue we have to how hundreds of people are logging into Genesis and bypassing our systems. Right. So time for me to get back to work. I think I know how he got away this time. Oh, How? Stephen liked to dump jobs on Sydney. She got frustrated, then started solving the problem. He has 3 ports he can use to directly hook into systems. Look at the medical scans, all 3 are active. He's got connections to 2 prostheses. One of those can plug into the medical pod itself in seconds. I bet he was crafty enough to have extra controls. He doesn't care that we blocked him from logging out, he just did it himself. Stephen smiled. Good. Very good. So now what do you think you can do? You have a chance every time he logs in and out to try and get his attention. Once he slides past, we can't track him in-game. Wally has some idea about matching login times to the time players enter the world. Difficult with tens of millions of players. He needs to build some new tools. Sydney grimaced. Working on that part. Make yourself useful and make another pot of coffee. == work went well for the most part. Milo was running into his usual problem of not enough parts. There was only so much he could do raiding from the dead sections. He really needed about a mile of new cable, 4 new air recycling systems, and numerous other machines and parts. He wondered again about the money Kaminsky was earning in the game. Time to check in. Kaminsky had been busy. He had 125 of the older pods up and running now. He got a batch of food cubes and started eating while watching what was going on. The food cubes tasted bad. Not spoiled bad, just normal bad. He'd eaten some bread from his pack in the game, and had a meal with Harry. The tastes had been so much better than what he was chewing now. As he was watching, a pod started flashing. The man inside was helped out, but couldn't walk. He was placed on a gurney, and taken to a makeshift infirmary. Several other people were in the same dingy room. Another person was led over to the pod and installed to take the sick man's place. Something wasn't right. Milo set up several monitors to show him the entire operation and watched it while doing his work on systems in E-section. One more person was wheeled in on a gurney from a flashing pod. Milo looked closer at the condition of the people in the pods. Most of them looked to be in advanced stages of malnutrition, or had some neurological disorder. He needed to do research on what Kaminsky was doing. What was happening to these people? It didn't take much digging. The lawsuits about the damage many of the early pod designs had done to millions of people were huge. It had taken decades to prove, and get the pods taken out of use. Every year, more people who had used those pods developed a disorder in their nervous system. Using the old pods was bad. Using them for days at a time was risking your life. The pods Kaminsky was using were going to end up killing people. This situation was way outside of Milo's experience. He had hidden all of his life. The thought of people being hurt bothered him. But the thought of having the authorities searching all over his section terrified him. He set up his system to start recording everything that Kaminsky was doing. In a few hours, most of the techs would leave and just the guards and one tech would be in the rooms all night. He made plans for an excursion down to their level. Until then, he'd go see where some of those old tunnels went and find a way back to Harry. Chapter 12. Leveling Up. Milo smelled something when he logged into the game. Something delicious. Something he really needed to find right now. He turned around to where his tutor, Galette, was sitting at a table having breakfast with a very small person with curly golden hair. Milo stared at the table full of food, trying to figure out what smelled so good. He mostly ate the food cubes from the processor, or when he could get it, freeze-dried meals. Come and sit, young Milo. I have a friend with me today. This is Sydney, a halfling from the Golden Vale. Sydney pointed at the food. Dig in. We've got plenty for the 3 of us. Galette made extra. Pancakes, eggs, bacon, and more bacon. Milo sat down. It does smell very good. Food in the game is so much better than where I live. He was putting a little of everything on his plate, tracking the smell. Was it the bacon? No, that smelled salty tasty, but not what he was looking for. He finally found the source of the smell in a small pot. He spooned some of the yellow stuff onto his plate. Sydney frowned. That's cheese sauce. It goes well when you put down an English muffin first, then the ham, then the sauce. Want to try it? Milo was scooping up the cheese sauce with bacon. No, this is fine. Really good. So much better than food cubes. He kept pausing to smell the cheese sauce. He would have to try to find this in the game. Maybe Harry knew where to get it. Is that what you normally eat? Food cubes? Sydney asked him. Doesn't everyone? I mean, food cubes are free. Milo got more bacon, this time pouring the cheese sauce on top. Sydney nodded. Oh, yep, free is good. Food cubes are free, so they're good. So, how are you liking the game? Milo quit eating. There was no more cheese sauce. I like it. It's nice and dark, and you can climb everywhere. I killed a boss and got some skill points I need to spend. I should get going. Thanks for breakfast. He entered the game as Sydney was trying to ask him something. Wait, you killed a boss? Damn it, Steven. He's hacking the system somehow. He sat there laughing at me, slurping down cheese sauce and bragging about killing a boss. Steven was looking at a picture of yellowish, glistening cubes in a bowl. Here, I found a picture for you. And I hope I'm never desperate enough to eat one. They are used to meet the daily nutrition requirements in some of the habitats. It's a chicken-flavored, enriched gel that gets pumped into each home. The gel goes into a tray, gets microwaved to cook it, then sliced into squares and presto, you have a bowl of food cubes. Cheap, nutritious, and horrible. Sydney had her doubts. And people actually eat this? People with no choice eat this. Be glad you didn't even know what it was until now. But, if true, it's a clue about our mysterious Milo. Milo appeared in the game, and stayed still for several minutes. Hearing nothing, he padded back towards Kronk's body. The big guy was rapidly drying out and shriveling up. It was easy to pick out the shiny bits of ore from his corpse. Over 2/3 of the contents of the cart had been normal rock. The rest seemed a mixture of rich ores, the rocks heavy with the metal. He piled it all off to the side. Maybe he could take some back, see what it was worth. His identify skill showed it to be a mixture of metals but mostly copper. The pick surprised him. It didn't look like much, but identify told him more. Dwarven mining pick. Tier 2, fine quality. A solid steel head on a sturdy hickory shaft. This pick will easily mine Tier 1 rocks and ore, and mine normally through Tier 2 strata. So maybe this was an old dwarven mine? Or maybe dwarves just made good picks and other miners used them? He took a look at the dense, shiny ball that had been inside Kronk earthen heartshroom, consumable. This immense heartshroom comes from a large cave guardian. It can be used in alchemy to make a large number of potions using earth magics and has many other uses. Heartshrooms may also be consumed by a brave individual. Effects will vary, but some type of ability will be gained that aligns with the type of heartshrooms. You might also take root. Kidding, that hardly ever happens. Milo wasn't quite sure he wanted to do that. Maybe after he spent his core skill points. He had spent time on the forums for the game. There was a lot of information about the abilities in Tier 1, and some stuff in Tier 2. He got the feeling very few people had moved on to Tier 2 so far. While a player could just take it easy and slowly level, to really excel they needed to somehow earn core skill points, or CSP. These were used to go shopping for special skills and abilities that increase a character's power greatly. Killing bosses was the main way to do that, either solo or in a group. But crafters could also earn them from making an exceptional item. And harvesters could get them from elementals. These were weak bosses that could spawn while a person was gathering raw materials. He'd seen mention of a sentient tree in a forest, an earth elemental, and monster made out of leftover bits from a butcher. These usually gave only a couple of points. Elementals were named bosses, the lowest category. After named were elites, and then monstrous bosses. Elites were considered something groups would fight. Monstrous were usually a raid boss in a dungeon. If Kronk had gotten one hit on Milo, he was sure it would have killed him. Everyone got access to the generic skills. There was a basic list, and then more to be found around the world. Generic core skills. Any player has access to these core skills. Many more skills can be learned by finding teachers, reading books, completing quests, or doing mighty deeds. Increase health 1. Plus 50 points to health score. Cost 2. Increase health 2. Plus 100 points to health score, must have level 1 first. Cost 5. Increase health 3. Plus 150 points to health score, must have level 2 first. Cost 10. Increase mana 1. Plus 50 points to mana score. Cost 2. Increase mana 2. Plus 100 points to mana score, must have level 1 first. Cost 5. Increase mana 3 plus 150 points to mana score, must have level 2 first. Cost 10. Increase stamina 1. Plus 50 points to stamina score. Cost 2. Increase stamina 2. Plus 100 points to stamina score, must have level 1 first. Cost 5. Increase stamina 3. Plus 150 points to stamina score, must have level 2 first. Cost 10. Identification 1. Gives information on an item or creature of levels 1 to 5 even if you are a lower level. Cost 3. Identification 2. Gives information on an item or creature of levels 6 to 10 even if you are a lower level. Cost 5. Tier 1 stats cap increase. Increase the cap on a statistic. Hard cap of 5 ranks bot per stat. Hard cap of rank 10 in any stat. Cost 1. Tier 1 Foundation Increase. Add 5 PTS to one of your foundation skills. Cost 1. Bonus points. These abilities add to your stats. Gaining bonuses does not affect stats gained by ranks. A total of 9 points may be bought this way in Tier 1. Spirit of the Ox 1. Plus 1 bonus to STR. A maximum of 3 points may be bought this way. Cost 3. Spirit of the Bear 1. Plus 1 bonus to Con. A maximum of 3 points may be bought this way. Cost 3. Spirit of the Monkey 1. Plus 1 bonus to Dex. A maximum of 3 points may be bought this way. Cost 3. Spirit of the Owl 1. Plus 1 bonus to Int. A maximum of 3 points may be bought this way. Cost 3. Spirit of the Cheetah 1. Plus 1 bonus to AGI. A maximum of 3 points may be bought this way. Cost 3. Spirit of the Pig. Plus 1 bonus to Whis. A maximum of 3 points may be bought this way. Cost 3. Spirit of the Hawk. Plus 1 bonus to Purr. A maximum of 3 points may be bought this way. Cost 3. Spirit of the Swan. Plus 1 bonus to Chaw. A maximum of 3 points may be bought this way. Cost 3. Second Wind 1. Once per day, regain 20 health, mana, stamina. Cost 1. Second Wind 2. Once per day, regain 50 health, mana, stamina. Cost 3. Second Wind 3. Once per day, regain 100 health, mana, stamina. Cost 5. Breathless 1. You may hold your breath 3x as long. 3 minutes. Cost 1. Breathless 2. You may hold your breath 10x as long. 10 minutes. Cost 1. Milo was more interested in the class and race skills. He knew he had to raise his stats some, but he could do that with the use of skills and gaining experience for now. Smuggler's stash looked very good, he'd have a safe spot to put his stuff. He needed a better understanding of Foundation. If you had a poor score in your Foundation, then that type of ability started lagging behind, even though you were gaining levels. A score of 25 was good enough to cover Tier 1. He was a long way from needing to worry about it though. Scout Core Skills Smuggler's Stash. Storage Skill. Summons/dispels a magical chest. Size increases with rank. 3 cubic feet, 9 cubic feet, 27 cubic feet. Cost 3/5/7. Skilled Provider. Your gathering skills have an increased chance of finding better quality items. Cost 1/2/3. Abundance. Your gathering skills return more resources than normally expected. Plus 10%, plus 25%, plus 50%, plus 75%, plus 100%. Cost 1/2/3/4/5. Unnoticed 1. You have a stealth-like skill that makes you unnoticed in normal settings by Tier 1 creatures. Combines well with Skulk. Cost 2. Silent Step 1. When trying to not be noticed, your steps make only 40% as much noise as normal. Combines well with Skulk. Cost 2. Unlimited Dark Vision. You see in darkness and magical darkness is normal, but in shades of gray. No limitations on distance. Cost 10. Jumping Jack. You may leap twice as far as normal. Cost 2. Fast Talk 1. Slightly increases the chance of someone believing your BS. Cost 2. Fast Talk 2. Greatly increases the chance of someone believing your BS. Cost 5. Never Lost. Vastly increased memory for keeping track of the routes you've taken before, reading maps, and following clues on treasure maps. Cost 3. Twist the Knife. When your opponent is not focused on you, you have an increased chance of a critical hit. Knife not required. Cost 2/5/10. Wererat Core Skills Tier 1 Strong Claws. Increased claw damage. Amount increases with rank. Plus 10, plus 20, plus 40. Cost 2/5/10. The Unseen Tail. Disguise/illusion in were form. Walk among humans in dark places and they suspect nothing. Works poorly in bright light. Cost 3. The Invisible Tail. Improved disguise, illusion in were form even in bright light. Hardly ever does someone notice you aren't a boring human. Cost 3. Whiptail. Your tail becomes a weapon equivalent to a small mace. Cost 2. Slashing Tail. Your tail does increased damage and can slash. Plus 10, plus 20, plus 40 damage. Requires Whiptail. Cost 2/5/10. Many Small Eyes. Make friends with local rats who will, maybe, do some scouting for you. Cost 2. See Through Small Eyes. Increased control of your small scouts and you are able to use their eyes instead of your own. Cost 3. Cheesemaking. An honorable tradition. So tasty. Int Crafting Skill. Cost 1 poison resistance. Gain the con skill poison resistance. Cost depends on whether the skill is primary, secondary, or tertiary. Cost 1/2/5. Disease resistance. Gain the con skill disease resistance. Cost depends on whether the skill is primary, secondary, or tertiary. Cost 1/2/5. Extra stabby. All of your attacks have an increased chance of a critical hit. Cost 2/5/10. Extra clever traps. Your traps and machinery almost always work, and in fiendish ways no one suspected. Even you are surprised at times. This core skill affects mechanic, trap maker, and other such skills. Cost 3/6/9. Not so fast regeneration. Grants increased, x2, health recovery. Slowly regenerate scar tissue, and missing body parts. A steady diet of cheese speeds the process. Cost 5. Pretty good regeneration. Grants increased, x4, health recovery. Regenerate scar tissue, and missing body parts in less than a week. A steady diet of cheese speeds the process. Cost 10. Mutant regeneration. Grants increased, x12, health recovery. Regenerate scar tissue, and missing body parts in less than a day. Warning. As with all mutations, there can be significant side effects. Cost 20. I'm the boss. Intimidation skill. Other ratkin are starting to fear your power, and everyone knows that means respect. Only the strong lead. Primary Cha skill. Cost 5/10/15. Magical aspects open up options to learn more mage skills. Each additional aspect has an increased cost. Chill of the Grave. You have a high death aspect. Training will let you learn death magics. Increasing cost with additional aspects. Increase your corruption by +1. Opens more options for mage abilities. Increased ranks decrease mana costs of casting spells. Cost 5/10/25. Deeds in the Dark. You have a high darkness aspect. Training will let you learn dark magics. Increasing cost with additional aspects. Increase your corruption by +1. Opens more options for mage abilities. Increased ranks decrease mana costs of casting spells. Cost 5/10/25. Stormborn. You have a high storm aspect. Training will let you learn storm magics. Increasing cost with additional aspects. Opens more options for mage abilities. Increased ranks decrease mana costs of casting spells. Cost 5/10/25. He wanted everything, of course. The last list was especially tasty. He immediately spent points on the unseen tail and whiptail. Being able to move around in his Wererot form would save a lot of trouble. He'd have to test it out in Shadowport and see what the limits were. If it worked, he would get the second level later. Whiptail gave him an extra weapon in combat, and one that most people wouldn't suspect. After a bit more thought, he got Smuggler's Stash and Jumping Jack. Moving over roofs and climbing tunnels often involved leaping. Having a way to transport more stuff would be great. It was a long way up to Shadowport. He tried to look up similar items on the forums. He found hundreds of threads complaining about a lack of storage devices and skills, but very little about the skills themselves. One thread claimed there were rings that some Imperial agents wore that stored messages and small items. Another hinted about an ability at Tier 2 that gave a player storage space. The only really reliable storage players seemed to have was a home chest that was in a bank or inn near your respawn point. Why didn't he have one? He'd have to look into that. He activated Smuggler's Stash to try it out. A beat-up oak chest appeared in front of him. He couldn't move it at all, but he could open it up. It took 25 mana to summon it, and nothing to send it away. The size of the chest was 3 feet x1. To test it, he filled it up with the good ore pieces, and some of the gears and pulleys he'd found at the top of the shaft. Plenty of room still. He made another trip up to the top and tossed down all the machine parts that he thought would fit. When the chest was full of rocks and metal, he dismissed it. It quickly faded from view. He was very tempted to take the second level of storage. He hated the thought of leaving things he might need. A life of never having enough materials warred with survival instincts that said, being dead is bad. There were stealth skills, regen, and extra health that he could purchase. What happened to the chest if he died? Testing and research first. He saved the points for now. Next chore was assigning his 500 boss experience from killing Kronk. He could only put that into mechanic, fleet of foot, acrobatics, or climbing. Level 1 in a skill was only 50 points, but from there it climbed to 150 for level 2 and 300 for level 3. Fleet of foot had only gained 15 experience, moving up slower because it was a secondary skill. Running from things that wanted to kill you seemed really important. He dumped 285 points into the skill. He'd noticed that unlike regular experience, boss experience wasn't affected by the 1/3 and 1/10 modifiers to secondary and tertiary skills. Acrobatics and climbing he felt he would be using a lot, so he put the remaining experience into mechanic. As soon as he completed putting in the boss experience, he received a message. Congratulations! You have achieved level 1. Experience needed for level 2 equals 3000. You currently have 1320 out of 3000 experience gains over level 1. Mechanic has reached level 2. Fleet of foot has reached level 2. Dodge has reached level 1. Small blades has reached level 1. Acrobatics has reached level 1. Climbing has reached level 1. AGI has reached level 2. Total of 4. Dex has reached level 1. Total of 3. Int has reached level 2. Per has reached level 1. Total of 3. You chose the Identify skill to fill an open slot. You have gained 15 CSP. You have 5 CSP you can spend. You purchased Smuggler's Stash, first level. You purchased Unseen Tail. You purchased Whiptail. You purchased Jumping Jack. You have encountered cheese. You have a minor yearning to eat more cheese. As Milo read the last part, he had a sudden craving for more of the cheese sauce he had for breakfast. Maybe he should just head straight up to Shadowport? He should be able to sneak around all the shrooms now that Kronk was gone. He looked around at the boarded-up tunnels. Where did they go? He wanted to know. He needed supplies, and some better gear. Time to get back to Harry, get paid, see if he could sell this ore, and then get a small cheesy snack. Chapter 13. Bad to the Bone. Milo skulked down the tunnel, back the way he had come when chased by Kronk. Exiting, he turned left and moved along the edge of the large mushroom-filled cavern with the massive shroom in the center. Immediately he ran into a small problem. The small myconids that he had disturbed had followed him. They weren't as fast as Kronk though, and had given up the chase at one point. They were wandering around aimlessly about 100 feet from the mine entrance. Milo elected to take the long way around the cavern. One of them was easy and he could probably fight a couple at once. But not a dozen, and especially not when there might be a lot more around. Hugging the wall, and being careful to not step on any stemlings, he moved slowly around the cavern. He bypassed 2 more large tunnels that seemed to lead even deeper into the caves. He was still hundreds of feet from the ramp up when he noticed the cavern wall was a lot closer to the big shroom. One of the large yellow blossoms moved and was pointing in his direction. A vine that wrapped around the gigantic stem twitched. The twitch became a hump of loose vine that traveled like a wave down the stem to the ground. Then through the mushroom field towards him, the partially buried vine kicking up loose soil and small mushrooms. It was headed in his general direction, or maybe a bit ahead of him. Following the twitching vine with his eyes, he saw it go to a large lump in the ground. Something slowly crawled out of that lump and stood up. Whatever it was, it had dirt and mushrooms all over it, as though it had lain in the ground for years. It wore a tattered orange robe and one bony hand held a staff or weapon. Miles was getting very nervous but didn't know whether to run forward or back. He compromised by skulking by the wall and hoping he wasn't noticed. He tried to identify the thing. Malskitter, the malevolent Bonecaster Blossom slave named Level 3 boss Milo, was seeing 2 names flashing. The first sounded like an evil villain from a bad movie. That kept fading and being replaced by Bonecaster Blossom slave. The creature shook itself more, and started shambling towards him. The vine stayed connected, running into the thing's ribcage where a blossom sprouted. Milo backed away a bit more, and the creature stopped. The vine was stretched tight and it couldn't move towards him. It was a stalemate for a moment. If Milo tried to get past, it could get to him. He'd have to go back. Or not? He cursed as he saw 2 more shambling forms moving around the perimeter towards him. One small, one massive and packing a huge sword. If he didn't want to join them, he needed to get past this one. Drawing the machete, he sprinted directly towards the Bonecaster Blossom slave. As he got closer, it brandished the melee weapon it held. It looked like a long stick with sharpened bones stuck through the shaft. Getting hit by it would be like taking multiple stabs from daggers. Milo had no intention of standing and fighting though. Watching for its first attack, he dodged low and rolled past it, crushing several small mushrooms, but luckily no stemlings. He came to his feet, and brought the machete down on the vine, slicing through it. The vine snapped back and thrashed as though he had caused it pain. He took a nasty slap to his side before he moved away from it. A bruise was worth it to defeat this foe so easily. Mocking laughter informed him that it wasn't so easy. Good, good. Cunning plan, youngling. You have freed me from the cursed shroom flower. Malskitter will reward you. All good, Mr. Skitter, glad to help. I don't suppose your reward is letting me sneak on past you? The skeleton laughed. The eye sockets that had been so dim before now shone with a green light. Milo noted that the skull was more animal-shaped than human, and there was a skeletal tail coming from a hole in the robe. Just his luck that the first ratkin he found was a crazy necromancer bone thing enslaved by a flower. You get a reward, lucky tall squeak. You get to host my spirit for the next few decades. This shell is worn out and infested with flowers. Never smell the flowers. I've been stuck here forever as my shell rotted and the flowers commanded my corpse. Milo started running. He got 2 steps before bony fingers clutched at his ankles, rooting him in place. Malskitter scrambled towards him. His first slash at Milo hit him in his left shoulder and arm. You fail to resist the spell grasp of the grave. You are immobile for 60 seconds. Malskitter the Malevolent punctures you for 40 points of damage. You are attacked by a spell. You resisted the spell of essence transfer. Milo struck back with his machete. The necromancer didn't even bother to dodge. Ribs cracked and bits of bone came loose. Careful, careful tall squeak, soon this will be your shell. Why not give up now? Milo brought up the pick he held in his left arm. The wound to his shoulder made it difficult to attack with the bulky weapon. Instead, Milo turned his hips and swung with his tail. The hardened tip of his tail hit the skeleton's right arm, snapping the dry rotted bone. Malskitter looked down at his arm and weapon on the ground. Oh bother, why are you being so difficult? This is an honor. Am I not one of the council's most accomplished minions? Foolish youngling. A bony glowing hand reached for Milo. It was a clumsy attack. Milo doubted that Malskitter had been much of a warrior before he was dead. Now with a body mostly turned to fertilizer he was clumsy and slow. Milo hit the reaching arm with his machete, snapping the other arm off. Looks like I disarmed you, Mr. Mal. Hands down best decision I made today. The skeleton turned and glared at Milo. Puns. You dare. This only a minor setback. Maybe you can pick up some new ones at a second-hand store? Ghahhhh. I will bite you to death. Milo's tail hit the brittle neckbone of the lunging skeleton. The skull came loose and fell face first in the dirt. Well, I guess another one bites the dusts. The scream from the skull was unintelligible. Milo checked on the other flower zombie things. They were still quite a bit away. He saw that the remains of Malskitter were rapidly decaying. The flower was a blackened husk, the bones rotted sticks. Nothing left but the orange robe and the weapon. Congratulations. You have slain Bonecaster Blossom Slave. You gain 50 experience in small blades and 50 experience in dex. Oops, guess that wasn't his final form? You have slain Malskitter the Malevolent. You gain 250 boss experience that may be used for the skills tail fighting, small blades, dodge. You gain 250 experience in the stats associated with the skills used. You have gained 3 core skill points. Rune Cowl of the Bonecaster. This item must be attuned to gain more information. Bonecaster's runed spike, an ugly weapon made of rune-carved bones and petrified wood. Must be attuned by a bonemancer to use. Milo grabbed both items, stuffed the cowl in his pack, put the machete in his belt, and started jogging along the wall. Not the time for stealth anymore. Time to run. More vines activated and sent out messages to the undead slaves of the flowers, but Milo was ahead of them now. Fleet of foot gave him plus 15% to his sprinting speed, and his agility stat gave him another small boost. By contrast, the undead slaves were slow and dragging heavy vines behind. He made it to the ramp up, and was out of range of the flower slaves. Stopping to catch his breath, he stayed watchful for packs of vengeful mushrooms, but nothing was heading his way. He carefully traversed the second room where Kronk had emerged. Coming from this angle, he saw another mine entrance that he had missed before in his headlong run along the other wall. Did this one connect with the others? Maybe he'd explore some after he got back to Harry. He still had to clear the rockfall, and get back to the mycologist. And find out what a heartshroom was. And figure out what a bonecaster was. And sell some ore. And pay a visit to Kaminsky. Chapter 14. Why do you have dead worms in your pocket? I've got him. Dr. Duran and Samantha turned to see Sydney triumphantly raising her arms in the air while stomping her feet. The stack of coffee cups next to her swayed ominously. Our little hacker isn't getting away from me. I figured out how he got a restricted race, and what it is. Stephen was very curious. Well, don't leave us guessing. Sydney got a fresh cup of coffee, making the other two wince as she poured sugar into the cup for far too long. He had criteria he was looking for. He wanted a tail, and to be shorter. Now you think that would narrow it down, but with so many rare evolutions to animal hybrid characters, demonic hybrids, even aquatic hybrids, it took a while to figure it out. But there was one more clue: cheese sauce. Samantha was confused. Cheese sauce? Sydney kept rolling. Yep, cheese sauce. I tried to bait him into having breakfast with me and talking. He didn't go for the hickory smoked bacon at first. He grabbed a bowl of hot cheese sauce for the eggs Benedict and started eating it by itself. He was in heaven, and only left once he had licked the last bit out of the bowl. Samantha was still confused. That helps how? Ha, knew you were going to ask that. There is one race that is playable by characters, shows on the list as yellow if you meet the requirements, is short, has a tail, and... The ultimate clue. Has a problem with cheese addiction. Stephen clapped. Well done. You're right. Our little hacker is a wererot. And I know his class too. The quest that lets you become a wererot is quite specific. You also take the special scout class for their race. The player is meant to be on the edge of society. A bit of a roguish outcast, doing work for the ratkin as well as the rougher parts of society like the thieves and assassins guilds. If we offered it for starting characters, I bet half of them would take it. Stephen had brought up the race and class combo. Oh, maybe more than that. Look at the core skills. A wererot scout can pick up an inventory skill cheaply with his CSP. That's one of the big bonuses for the class. Also, why it has some major downsides. Samantha looked over Stephen's shoulder, then paced around the room. So, a group of hackers, who can get hundreds of people illegally into the game, also have a way to generate all the smugglers they need to move around whatever it is they don't want us to know about. == digging out of the mushroom caves turned out to be easier than Milo had expected. No huge rockfalls had occurred and he was able to greatly increase the narrow area he had to slide through. He grabbed the bags of shrooms and trudged back to Harry's home in the underground. Yo, Harry, I have your stuff. The large man shambled out of his lab area. I'm quite happy to see you succeeded. If you had died, it would have been ages before someone else took the job. Silly, since it's such an easy one. Milo collapsed and leaned against a wall. Oh, piece of cake. No complications at all. You neglected to mention the Myconians. Harry waved him off. Tisk tisk. The only way a Myconian would come threaten you is if you stepped on a stemling, and then you would have plenty of time to run. They are quite slow. But, are you saying you did see some? They had grown quite rare. A natural thing, I suppose, with the rarity of mushroom groves. Milo didn't know if Harry was joking or not. Rare? There are huge caves full of them. I got chased by over a dozen, and one as big as a house. Not to mention the one as big as 6 houses. 6 houses? If you are joking, I'm going to be very upset with you. Milo felt a bit of danger from the rotund man. He was serious. I swear. A mushroom that stretched upwards for several stories. It's in a massive cavern, covered in yellow flowers, and has a lot of nasty slaves it has hooked to vines. Harry sat down in the dirt. Oh my. That's going to make things difficult. Describe things for me. Leave out no detail. Milo did, Harry staying silent and shaking his head for most of the story. That's quite amazing. I haven't gone into the caverns for decades. I had no idea those caves had regrown that way. The biggest must have migrated in and then rerooted. Something that big doesn't grow in just 100 years. But the yellow flowers are bad news. They do indeed enslave people. Luckily, they can't leave the flower colony. By the way, just curious, but when you killed the big one, Kronk, did you bother to search the body at all? A heartshroom from such a creature would be quite valuable. Really? Maybe I'll go back and look. How valuable are we talking? Harry reached into a pocket and pulled out some fish bones, some shiny rocks, and an old crumpled pair of muddy socks. One moment, it's here somewhere. Ah. At the third pocket he found a small cloth sack. Opening it, he dumped out a wrapped bundle. Open it up. I'll think you'll like what's inside. Milo opened the bag carefully. It's full of dead worms, Harry. Oh, is that where those went? Wait, try this bag. The second bag had a rather plain copper ring in it without a stone or other ornamentation. The interesting thing about some really powerful items is they look like common trash. It's why I kept that one. I love common trash. At Harry's urging, he tried on the ring. He immediately knew what it was. Ring of the Swiss Army. Made by the Archmage Elsinore and given to each member of the Mage Corps of Swissleland. This ring can cast the following spells without need for mana. Each spell may be cast 1 time each day. Darn Socks, 2 pairs, Water Breathing, Self, 1 hour, Summon Nutcracker. Lasts until no more nuts present in 10. Protection from biting and stinging insects, keeps them at bay for 1 hour. Heat fondue, creates a small flame that will heat oil or other things in a fondue pot. Duration 4 hours. Sharpen tool. 4 sharpening per day. Carl's handy tent helper, sets up a large tent or packs it up. Usable twice a day. Summon guard lizard, brings a guard lizard from the Finakioki swamp to guard your camp for 8 hours. Deflect blame, something bad happened, can't be your fault, must be someone else. Closing parenthesis. Dog bite fixer, takes the edge off of nasty hangovers. Summon wine, 1 quart, quality varies. Ha, knew you'd be impressed. Now let's talk trade. An item like that doesn't come along every day. Milo thought about it. He had no clue what the heartshroom might do, and was a bit leery of the warning about side effects. And while the ring was odd, it might be quite useful, or he could trade it off to someone else. Mostly, he knew Harry really wanted the weird item, and Harry was one of the few people Milo knew. He lived down where Milo wanted to explore, and had offered to teach him stuff and give him jobs. Even if the ring was worthless, it might still be worth making the trade. You talked me into it, Harry. Milo got his pack and pulled out the earthen heartshroom. Harry looked at the strange thing in awe. Oh yes. Thank you, Milo. This should do nicely. And with that, Harry opened his mouth extremely wide, and pushed the whole thing in. He made joyful chewing sounds for a full minute, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. Oh, thank God. I feel so much better after that. Milo had backed away while Harry was eating. He wasn't sure what was going to happen. When nothing happened, he was a little disappointed. So, what happens now? What happens now, Harry said, is that I get to take my first bath in 50 years. Luckily, I have a good scrub brush and some sulfuric acid. That should help. You might want to head upstairs for a day or two until the stench clears out. Harry tossed him a bag that clinked. Here's your pay. Go have some fun. Then if you still want to help an old troll with his jobs, come find me again. Milo didn't have to be told twice. He grabbed his odd belongings and started to climb back up toward Shadowport. Congratulations. You have completed the quest. Shrooms in the Dark harvested 20 pounds of the correct mushrooms. Actually returned, a first. Completed a bonus objective of curing Harry of his earthen mana deficiency. Rewards. 100 copper pennies, instruction in basic mycology, Dr. Harry Earthtongue considers you a friend. Chapter 15. Making new friends. His legs aching, Milo finally climbed up the long ladder to the mine area. Going down was so much easier. He'd had no idea how deep in the earth Harry was. But coming back up, he felt every single step. And he was starving. The last of the fried mushrooms Harry had given him were gone. He'd stopped for a break on the way up and burned nearly all his stamina to change back to human. He wanted to test Unseen Tale on someone other than an entire guild house full of people. A nap for a few hours in a side crevice had helped restore him. It was busier in the mines when he got there. Dwarves and humans were the dominant races, but he saw a scattering of others. A miner class must come with a dark vision skill to help the humans and other races navigate down here. There were a few torches now and then, but not many. Several miners were again enjoying the heat of a fire. As he walked by, someone yelled, "Well, look who made it back. You're going piss off Pete something fierce." He gave out odds of 3 to 1 you'd never walk back up from the basement. Another noticed his pick. Whoa, wait a second. What the hell is going on here? Where did you steal that pick from? The guy talking was a tall and slightly skinny human. Guys, this asshole stole one of our picks. Several more miners wandered over. Milo didn't like the way the skinny miner was accusing him. I didn't steal it. It's mine. Get out of my way. Skinny deliberately stepped in Milo's way. I say we search him, see what this little nobody has on him. Probably stole some stuff from other people. Milo now had 3 other miners besides Skinny around him. He noticed they were all human. One of them with dark red hair and missing an eye was wearing a familiar symbol around his neck. Milo looked at him and said softly, Kulog. He reached into his pocket and held out the small marker Squint had given him. One eye nodded at him, acknowledging he'd seen the mark. Get out of his way, Lem. Torg, Vela? Go back to the fire. The 2 men named shrugged and left. The skinny miner, Lem, was still being belligerent. I don't answer to you, Barg. You back off and I'll deal with this thief myself. One eye nodded. Sure thing, Lem. He's all yours. I'll just stay and watch the show. Milo pulled back on his pick and glared at Lem. He was still in a fight, but it was better odds than 4 to 1 now. Let go of the pick, and back off. Lem laughed. Make me thief. I'm not really scared of your little makeshift stick there. I have a sticker of my own. From nowhere, Lem held a knife. Formalities were over as far as Milo was concerned. He pushed instead of pulling on his pick and let go. Lem stumbled a half step and Milo swung at him. The Bonecaster's ruined spike slashed across Lem's face in 2 places, opening up his cheek and cutting into his forehead. Blood spilled into Lem's eyes. You cut me. The little shit cut me. You're a dead man. He lunged forward at Milo, who tried to dodge, but still took a nasty cut on his left forearm. As Lem stumbled past, he gripped the weapon in both hands and brought it down hard on Lem's back. 2 of the blades punctured deep into his body, and he fell to his knees. Milo pulled out his weapon, and backed off. He reached into his pocket and held out the small marker Squint had given him. Barg yelled out. He's letting you off easy, Lem. Do you want to keep going or should we patch you up some and call it a day? Screw you, Barg. I'm going to kill that little thief if it's the last thing I do. Barg shook his head. Okay, might be a bad decision. Lem staggered to his feet. Milo circled him, making him stagger back and forth. After a pathetic lunge by Lem, Milo again hit him from behind and danced away. Lem fell and didn't move. Milo dismissed the kill message. Barg clapped slowly. Nice kill, kid. You didn't give him much chance to hurt you, and even gave him a chance to crawl away. Don't feel bad. Lem has pulled that shit before. He liked to pick on people smaller than him, even pulled it on a couple of new miners before we got him in trouble with the guild. You were just taking out the trash. He moved closer and said quietly. I'll let someone know you can handle yourself. Kulog. Miles nodded. Kulog. Then he started up the stairs to the guild hall. On the first landing, he took off the torn and bloody shirt he was wearing. He tore it into strips and bound up his arm, then pulled out the cowl from his pack. It was a bit tattered and torn, but it was made of a very heavy cloth and was in much better shape than his shirt had been before the fight. It smelled of earth and death, but then, so did most everything down here. He pulled it on and went up the stairs. Getting to the main hall of the guild, he approached the halfling at the desk. He looked up. What do you need? And if it's which whorehouse has the best buffet today, that would be Mama Daintyfoot's. Tell her Georgie sent you over. Milo had no idea what that all meant. I owe you money. I got to level 1. Georgie stared at him. Holy shit, you don't say? You're the new kid from a day or so ago. It's a miracle you leveled up in a second that you made it back from the basement. As for coming right over to pay dues, I'm putting you up for sainthood. He stood on his desk and yelled out. You ass wipes, see this? This is how it's done. Pay your dues on time and don't make me hunt you down. Good going, kid. Several people grumbled and said interesting words about Milo. Like he needed another target on his back. He paid the halfling another penny for getting to level 1. Let me guess, 2 pennies for level 2? Georgie nodded. You figured it out all on your own. Simple system helps people remember it. Milo ventured a question. Is there a place to sell some ore nearby? I found some down in the basement. Georgie considered. You just want to sell it on the side? Or you want to deal with the Miners Guild? You'll get more from them, but you'll have to join and pay dues. Milo thought about the chest of ore. He might as well get the best price, and he might find something else down in the tunnels. Point me to the Miners Guild, please. No problem, kid. I'll walk you over. Follow me. Milo followed Georgie up a flight of stairs to a large door with a plaque that had the words, Honored Society of Miners #67 feet. Georgie pointed at the door. This is the main office, all business, but you can sell ore downstairs too. First level down. Hey, Druger, I brought you a new recruit. Remember that when we play poker next week. Georgie left Milo in front of a desk where an older dwarf with a peg leg and graying hair sat. Hi kid, I'm Druger. I run the guild here in Shadowport. You been down deep? Yes sir. Just got back from the basement. I didn't mind much, but I found a bit while mushroom hunting. Milo showed him the first chunk he had found, and a small piece of what he thought was copper he'd dug out of the mineshaft while walking out. Not bad. This reddish one is deep copper. It's a bit denser than regular copper, comes from deeper down. The basement is a decent area to find it. The shiny nugget is auric. That's an alloy of gold and silver. Good stuff. Both are tier 2 materials, have to go deep for them. The guild will buy what you bring up. Druger weighed the chunk of ore in the nugget. Guild will buy these for 1 silver, 11 copper. Most of that is the nugget. You could also use them to pay your guild fee. The fee for a month is 5 pennies. That lets you mine under the town and sell to the guild at good rates. Or, if you are so minded, I'll sign you up as a full-fledged member. That's 1 silver now, and 1 a year. I'll be honest, Being a full member might help you out down there. Some of the boys don't like noobs. Milo had already seen that. He paid for full membership and got the 11 coppers in change. He walked out of the guild hall intending to head back to the inn and his small room. The trip over the rooftops went without an incident. Twice people chased him, but he easily leapt across the gaps in houses and scrambled up and down the terraces and ladders. Climbing up to the inn took the last of his energy. He barely noticed the innkeeper or anyone else. After double-checking the lock on his door, he fell on the bed and went to sleep. Something woke him hours later. The now familiar notices about experience or kills or anything else. He dismissed them and went back to sleep, still tired. You have slain a foe with the weapon, Shadowblight, and it has decided to attune to you, and partially revealed itself to you. This ancient weapon has been used by generations of rat-kin bonecasters to slay their foes and instill fear in their minions. The carvings on the bone spikes will weaken your foes, robbing their attacks of damage. Your own strikes will be enhanced. Slay more foes to reveal more of Shadowblight's powers. Foes will do -10 damage against you with melee weapons for each wound that you inflict upon them. Base chance to hit, 40% plus 5% for each wound inflicted on your enemy. Base damage of 40 plus 10 for each wound you inflict on your enemy. You have mixed your blood with the souls chained within, bone-runed cowl, and it has chosen to attune to you. The souls inside don't think you are worthy, but the cowl isn't picky. The bone-runed cowl has used 5 CSP to grant you the skill, bonecasting. You have gained the level 0 spell, Exploding Skull. You have gained the level 0 spell, Bone Spike. Bone-runed cowl is now soulbound. Chapter 16. Wash Day. At some point, Milo awoke. He wished he hadn't. His head was pounding hard and there was a horrible smell in the room. His mouth was incredibly dry. Stumbling out of bed, he went to the pitcher of water on the table, bypassing the glass and just pouring it into his mouth and down the front of his robe. The few drops of liquid that hit the floor looked like mud. It wasn't hard to guess where the smell was coming from. The very horrible smelling robe that he took off a corpse rotting under a large collection of fungus. He needed to find someplace to wash. Maybe the innkeeper knew of a place? Milo had little experience with where people washed either cloths or themselves. The home's inhabitants had a small cleaning facility, but he was pretty sure Shadowport wouldn't have the same. And dirty clothes were just tossed into a recycler and you got new ones made when you needed them. They didn't last long, being mostly made of fibers from recycled paper and the shredded clothes you threw away. He made his way to the innkeeper, who backed up a step and did not look happy to see him. "Gah, what a nasty pong. Get your butt down to the tubs and out of my inn. Don't come back until you've washed up. You smell like 5 years of dead turds." Milo rushed out of the inn and went in the direction he was pointing. It wasn't hard to get directions. Anyone he approached noticed the stench, and when he said, "Tubs," he was hastily given directions. Only the last person didn't mind. An mostly deaf old man was selling tubs of rotten fish for bait or fertilizer. He must have lost his sense of smell years ago. He smiled at Milo and pointed at his wares. Fish? Stinky fish. Good bait. That turned out to be most of the words he knew. Milo and he played a game of charades with Milo miming washing himself and his clothes. Eventually the old man understood and pointed to a large building, but shook his head sadly when Milo bought no fish. A few hundred feet closer to the harbor was a huge warehouse. Entering by the large open door, he saw that one end of the building was occupied by large tubs of soapy water. Further in were long lines where clothes were hanging to dry. A line of sheets separated the two areas. Milo was suddenly aware of the predicament of having only one set of clothes. Luckily there was stall selling clothes nearby. All the wares were heavily patched or sewn from the remains of several items. For 2 copper pennies Milo acquired a quite colorful long-sleeved shirt and pants that each had at least 7 colors of worn cloth. He found a corner of the warehouse to quickly change his clothes and rolled up the dirty ones, lessening their smell a bit. Entering into the building with the tubs again, he saw a large heavily set matron at a counter who was taking money from a long line of women. Milo took his place in line and patiently waited. The women looked him over. "Let me guess, got your one set of clothes to wash. Waste of a tub, but it's your money. Take the one at the end, only used once today, water still has some soap in it. Dump it down the drain when you're done." Milo paid over another copper penny, seeing his small amount of money leaving him rapidly. He needed to go sell the ore in his chest. Milo washed his pants and undergarments first, then put the robe in last. The slightly dirty water immediately turned a red-brown in color. Taking a brush, he worked at loosening the embedded grime in the robe. Huge amounts of muck came off of it, until the water was dark and opaque. Maybe this was going to take another tub? He saw the drain next to the tub, and a spigot on the tub. While the murky, smelly water drained out, he went to fill buckets and rinse out the robe. The women had all dumped their clothes into the tubs, and left them to soak. Even the matron taking money was gone. Another 20 gallons of water went into the tub, and again the robe shed dirt and blood and things he didn't want to think about. The water was nearly black and a smell like a rotten egg was coming from the tub. Her hurriedly drained the water and got more. The third tub was just as bad, but on the fourth he made some headway. On the fifth he actually was able to rinse the robe out and the water looked murky but not horrible. The color of the robe was now a bright orange with some worn brown stitching visible. Milo didn't see anyone at all around. There was water heating over a fire. He left a copper penny on the table, and decided to get himself clean. It was relaxing sitting in the water. Even after a bit of sleep, he was worn out. He leaned back and without meaning to, fell asleep. Brother Ignatius of the Holy Order of St. Joan of the Fire was surprised to see people entering his small church. 24 of the local women were entering and sitting down to pray. 3 of them stood at the front of the church, wringing their hands and wanting to talk to him. Ignatius was always happy to talk and ease problems. He got a lot of dinner invites that way, and the women in this part of town were known for their cooking. What they couldn't tithe on holy days they made up for in free meals to keep him fed. Ah, bless you all. What can this poor servant help you with today? Malka was the oldest of the 3, somewhere north of 100 years and related to most everyone in the area. She was a midwife and potion maker, healing with poultices and tonics. Her daughter Elena was her apprentice, learning her ways. The large one was Alessandra, the washwoman. She knew a bit of healing as well, and was rumored to have been a priestess once, but Ignatius had never heard of what religion. Malka spoke up. There is something happening. Alessandra interrupted, and it's happening in my bathhouse. We need you to come see. As I was saying, Malka looked pointedly at Alessandra, there is a wandering holy man in the bathhouse. Now this was interesting. Ignatius smiled. Ah, I see. A wandering holy man. Well, I hope he has time to stop by and I can meet him. You should be happy he chose your wash house, Alessandra. Saint or sinner, we all need to wash our clothes now and then. Is there some problem? Malta thumped her cane on the ground. You could say that. He's freeing souls from some ancient cloth. His washwater runs with the blood of their sins and the souls are hovering over my bathhouse. Most of the women can't see them, but it's making everyone nervous. And does anyone see these things? Or just hear them? At times the wind would come whipping into the cavern ahead of a storm. Many of the superstitious would attribute wind whistling through an attic as old souls howling. More than one dinner invite had included a quick exorcism and some advice on stuffing some wool into the cracks in attic walls. Malta looked stern. Alessandra and I can see them moving about and wailing. But Elena can see them plainly. Tell him, girl. Elena was nervous, but everyone said she'd inherited the sight from both sides of her parentage. Every time he has dumped out a tub of water, another soul rises from the robe he is cleaning. There are 5 souls hovering in the air, arguing with each other about what to do. Ethereal chains still attach themselves to the garment. Oh, well, yes, that needs. Right, let me get my staff and a few things and I'll go speak to him. What is he doing now? Elena blushed and Alessandra smirked. He decided to cleanse himself. He took a bath in my tubs and is now snoring, exhausted from his labors. You need to do something, Ignatius, or we'll never get our washing done. No one is going into the wash house with some crazy holy man there and souls up in the rafters wailing. I see. I will go investigate for you. The wash house was a quick walk. A few women were still by the door, stealing looks at the holy man. The 3 women with the sight hadn't exaggerated. There were 5 powerful spirits in the air, with chains running down into a washtub. By their look, all were wizards of some type. He saw 2 humans, a ratkin, an elf, and a lizardman, all wearing a similar elaborate runed robe. The holy man, if that's what he was quite young. He was snoring, only his face showing in the water. In the tub next to him was robe he had been laboring to cleanse. It was tattered and worn, but looked quite powerful. Ignatius hated to interrupt anyone who was having a good nap, but obviously, something needed to be done. Milo woke up to someone nudging his shoulder and saying, "Excuse me." The man standing next to his tub was a priest of some sort wearing fancy vestments and holding a wooden staff. Startled, Milo stood up, realized he was both wet and naked, and scrambled for his new, patchwork pants. Oh, sorry. Dozed off. I was just so tired. The priest nodded. As well you should be. Cleansing spirits is difficult work. I came by see if I could be of some assistance. Spirits? Milo wasn't sure what the man was talking about. He dried himself off with his shirt and put it on. He did hear something odd. Wind? The priest pointed to the rafters. At first Milo only saw smoke, but the more he looked, the easier it was to see the 5 spirits chained to the robe in the washtub. They noticed him staring and turned as one, watching him. Milo turned to the priest. I'll be honest, I was just washing out an old robe I found. The priest considered for a moment. Then I don't think you are quite done with the job. Quest. Free the souls of your predecessors bound into the bone-ruined cowl. You have begun the process of freeing the 5 bonecasters who owned the garment before you. Each offers you a reward for freeing him from bondage. Success. The bone-ruined cowl will be empty, and when you die your final death, you won't have to share it with anyone. You will also receive a gift from each of your predecessors. Alternate success. Keep the souls enchained. After all, it's what they did. Benefit from their power and knowledge and quickly become a force to be reckoned with. Of course, when you die, they'll be waiting for you. Chapter 17. Unchained. Milo had so many questions about this quest. Obviously, there were downsides to putting on questionable pieces of clothing taken from mushroom-infested ratkin sorcerers. But one thing was pretty clear. He had to make a choice to keep the old souls chained up, or set them free. And this was actually an easy decision for Milo. He never wanted to go back to belonging to someone. And he wasn't going to hold the chains of someone else. I think I could use that assistance. How do I set them all free? Ignatius laughed. Your part is straightforward, just keep washing that tunic and dumping the water. I think I know an exorcism to help. The priest dug into his exorcism kit. Use this along with the soap, it's dust from the tomb of Saint Frederick the Valiant. A great priest. He still holds the record for the most demons exorcised during the solstice festival. Milo was skeptical, but took the packet of gray powder and dumped it in. How did someone decide that that dust was magical? He suspected it was an excuse to make sure someone swept up the dust now and then. Ignatius came back in followed by a large gaggle of women who surrounded the Milo's washtub. All together now, ladies, let's start with the hymn of mourning from the festival of summer, and then continue with all 97 stanzas of Begone, Spirit, Begone. One of the more elderly women got excited. Oh, I always liked that one. We used to take a sip of wine at each stanza. It made things so much more fun. Ignatius suddenly realized why the summer choir practices were so rowdy and well attended. Milo dumped the tub, and it was refilled with hot water by 2 younger boys hauling buckets. As they ran to get more, he overheard one say, "Jed is going to be so jealous. I can't wait to tell him we helped some crazy holy man kick out demons from an old shirt." Ignatius was busy drawing runes on the stone floor and lighting some scented candles. From somewhere a couple of bottles of wine appeared and were passed around at the end of each stanza. Somewhere around stanza 39, Milo heard a loud crack, and one of the ethereal chains cracked and disappeared. The spirit thumbed his nose at the others, bowed to Milo, and soared off into the sky. Regulus Tiborian, High Diviner of the Lapis Empire, is free of his chains. You receive his blessing. While bound to the bone-ruined cowl you gain +2 int. Several of the ladies excitedly clapped. Ignatius tossed more dust and some cedar shavings into the washtub. Steady on, ladies. We have only started. Going to need more wine then. Mascator the Malevolent has broken free of his chains. He thinks you are a fool to give up such power. He will return someday to make you his slave. The spirit of the rat-kin dove down into the earth. Albrecht the Undecided thanks you for freeing him. He's spent far too many years studying one thing and is off to try his hand at enchanting flowers and baking pies. He stuffs some of his accumulated knowledge into your skull. You have gained the crafting skills. Bone carving and scrimshaw. Albrecht's spirit turned in a circle several times before flying off in a random direction. 2 spirits were left. The chorus was up to the 53rd stanza. The wine bottles were proliferating, and a small crowd was forming, with vendors selling treats. Hortifax Ribtaker has been freed from his ethereal bonds. He acknowledges the debt owed to you and bequeaths to you a small fraction of his knowledge of runes. You have gained the lore skill. Runes, whatever Hortifax had been, it wasn't pretty. The spirit screamed, and flew low over the crowd, scattering them. It laughed and took off to parts unknown. The Oracle of Oblivion, she who reads the bones of the ancients, seer of the frozen wastes, collector of fingernails of dead men, and rider of the great flightless grebe, has chosen to depart. Weep, for you will not see her like again in 1,000 years. She leaves you a portion of her spirit. You gain plus 100 mana. The last spirit glowed and became visible to everyone. Her chain dissolved and she was gone. Milo sat back. His arms ached and his fingers were raw. He held up the bone-ruined cowl and saw that it was completely clean, except for a small dark stain on one arm where he had been wounded. A small silver chain ran from the tattered robe and encircled his waist. Ignatius raised his hands and led the choir in one more round, and then they all dissolved into talk and laughter. Oh, we need to do this more often. We haven't had a good exorcism in years. Milo wrung out the water from the robe. Alessandra walked over to him. Here now, let me dry that for you. I don't have much power, but I can manage the drying cantrip easily. She cast a small spell and all the water dropped from the robe, drying it instantly. Milo put it on over his shirt. He eyed the crowd at the entrance which was starting to come this way. It made him very nervous. Too many people. Ignatius noticed. Let's be on our way. We can sneak out this way. Lets you keep your status as unknown and mysterious. You'll get more free dinners that way. Chapter 18. Apple Core, nothing more. Milo failed to see how a free meal from chanting washwomen was a good thing, but he took the priest's word for it and thanked him. Then he quickly scampered off into the city, sticking as much as he could to roofs and alleys, avoiding people. While hidden high above the street, he changed into his natural form. Time to test out this disguise skill. He'd much rather move around as a wererot than a human, and he needed to test the limits of the skill. He still had 8 points he could spend on abilities and might consider buying Invisible Tail if anyone saw through the base skill. Wandering down the street, skulking in shadows as he preferred to do, and staying away from people was working fine. No one noticed him, and if they did, they just saw another human keeping to the shadows. Venturing out into the better lit streets near the harbor made him nervous, but he needed to test the skill. The bright end of the city was a busy place today. Several merchant ships had come into the harbor, which spurred the locals to quickly set up merchant stalls and street fairs in the larger courtyards. Sailors spent money, new goods flowed into the city, and business was good for everyone. Milo decided to approach a fruit and vegetable vendor at the edge of a small market. The area was well lit, but he could easily retreat to the darker alleys if he needed. A large, plump man behind the counter looked at Milo and snarled. No handouts, and don't touch the merchandise. Milo flipped him a copper coin and said, apples. That brought a change to the merchant. A smile broke out on his face. Yes sir, finest apples in town right now, just got them from one of the orchards around the Horn, picked fresh 2 days ago. He grabbed a sack made from coarse hemp and filled it with 24 apples. Milo noticed that the ones that went in first were from the barrels behind the counter, and only the top few were the large ripe ones from the counter. Milo took the bag and thanked the man. He began wandering through the area with more confidence. A few times he saw human whelps running through the market, or hanging out by various stalls. Many of them seemed quite thin and raggedly clothed. The merchants eyed them carefully. A tugging at his trousers alerted Milo to one of them standing next to him. 2 actually. Behind the boy in dirty rags was a thin waif of a girl holding a crude cloth doll. Please sir, might I have an apple for my sister? I don't even mind one with worms. Milo had plenty of apples he wasn't going to eat, he gave each of them one of the good ones off the top. If there was any doubt about their hunger, it was disproven by how the boy's eyes got large, and the girl immediately bit into hers as they ran off quickly. From behind him he heard a chuckle. Oh, you're in for it now. Every one of those urchins has a dozen hungry friends and they'll tag you for an easy handout now. The speaker was an old woman who was sitting in front of a small table full of knives and kitchen utensils. Milo shrugged. I don't mind. They were hungry. I know what that's like. Would you like an apple? The old woman considered him for a second. Yes, I would, if you're still handing them out. I'm Katie, by the way. Milo tossed her an apple that she caught and bit into. Not bad, fresh from the farm these are. Her focus turned to something past Milo and she chuckled again. Best be on your way, or be prepared to feed a horde. Word got out of your generosity. Sure enough, there were a dozen children coming his way, begging for something to eat. He began tossing each an apple. They all ran off except for one tall, thin girl of about 12. She was looking at Milo strangely. How come you have a tail? Damn it. He should have expected that the illusion might not work on everyone. Long story, but it comes in handy. He used his tail to reach into the mostly empty sack and toss her another apple. She deftly grabbed it and put it into a pocket. She thought about it and nodded her head. When I tell the others, they'll all want tails too. She was eyeing the mostly empty sack of apples. Milo grabbed the sack with his tail and handed it to her. Well, it's rude to mention other people's tails. Maybe you could hand out the rest of these for me? The girl grabbed the sack, her face showing an innocent, wide-eyed expression. Thank you so much. I agree, rude to talk. She waved and ran off to the nearest alley. Freed of his burden of fruit, Milo continued his walk around the market, exiting on the side nearest the harbor. Actual sunlight was now hitting the streets, slanting in from the sun above the bay. Jumping to avoid a man pushing a wheelbarrow, Milo bumped into two sailors from one of the ships. One of them turned and scowled at him. Since when do they let your kind wander around the city? Milo had pushed the limits of the skill. Standing in sunlight, both of the sailors seemed to see him as he truly was. The other smiled. Oh, look, the little rat is scared. Didn't think we'd notice you skulking about. Wonder if they still have a bounty on rats' tails down at the portmaster? This one would bring a few drinks worth of coins. That was enough for Milo. He turned and ran. The sailors in hot pursuit. Another aspect of the skill seemed to be that it failed utterly when running through a street of people and the two people chasing him were yelling, "Grab the rat," and pointing. Luckily, the street was even more crowded. While the two sailors ran around people in carts, Milo jumped onto or over them, or skittered between their legs. As he ran through the small market, he passed a gaggle of children eating apple cores. The smallest girl looked up at her brother and said, "See. He did have a tail. I told you he did." An older girl patted her on the head and said, "Shush. Rude to talk about other people's tails." Taking to the roofs, Milo kept moving until he was deep into the darker part of the city, where streets were always lit by lanterns. Crouching under the eaves on the top level of a 9-story pagoda, he caught his breath and opened up his skills window. The first thing that he saw was a message from the night before telling him he had acquired the bonecasting skill. He vaguely remembered the messages as he fell asleep, but had forgotten about them. He had bled onto the old robe, and bound himself to it. That explained the chained spirit somewhat. But what exactly was bonecasting? Glad you asked. Bonecasting is a very specialized form of spellcasting that draws from necromancy and death magics. Bones are the tools of your trade and the fuel for your spells. Each level of bonecasting will give you access to 2 general knowledge spells of that rank. At level 0 you have the following spells: Exploding Skull. Charge a skull with your mana and hurl it at your enemies, doing damage to anyone within 20 feet of its impact point. Bone Spike. A small bone dart erupts from your body and shoots towards an enemy. Range: 100 feet. To increase the power of these spells, increase your rank in bonecasting. Bonecasting can be enhanced by the use of bones from powerful creatures, by rune carving, and in conjunction with alchemy, poisoning and other magical skills. More information will be available from your arcane library. His mind whirled with ideas. How could he find out about all of these things? He made himself a jobs list, just like he would have done on a project in Section E. Oh, he should log out soon, he realized. To-do list. 1. Buy invisible tail. 2. Sell ore and get some coins. 3. Find a butcher or other place to get some bones and skulls. 4. Go shopping in the Market of Light's End for some supplies. 5. Go deep again, and see how mushroom guardians liked exploding skulls. 6. Ask Harry about arcane libraries. He headed back to his small room at the inn and logged out. Chapter 19. Sickle. Milo went to log out of the game, and got a most peculiar notification. An arcane library is available for you to claim, but an advisor waits to speak with you. Please choose one of these before logging out. Or sure, you could do the annoying thing that lets you bypass the game controls, but where is the fun in that? Milo did have a couple of questions for Sydney, but the lure of an arcane library outstripped even the chance of a meal with cheese sauce. The world darkened as he logged out and appeared somewhere else. Or perhaps, nowhere else, was a better description. Milo was standing upon a small stone platform that seemed to be hanging in space. All around him, stars glittered in a cold void. The air was thin with no wind, and it was completely silent. The only thing on the platform was a stone archway enclosing a peculiar door. At first, Milo thought it was made of wood. But as soon as he touched it, he knew the truth. It was bone. Huge, thick slabs of bones carved and fitted together like a puzzle. Bones from a beast that had walked the land long, long ago. He got a sense of its long heavy steps. The door was made of its shin bones. There was a latch that opened the door. Milo stepped inside and shut the door behind him. Whatever was inside was better than the void with its endless sky. He stepped down into the room. The floor was a mosaic of small pieces fit together in geometric patterns. Shades of white, ivory, and alabaster created interlocking sunbursts. The curved roof was of the rib bones of some leviathan. They arched up to connect with the ridgeline of vertebrae 30 feet above his head. The walls were plaster above wooden paneling, but he could feel the bones behind the decorations. 4 hallways provided exits from this central room, but Milo was more interested in what was in front of him. A rug was laid on the mosaic floor in front of a huge fireplace. 2 chairs had been placed on the rug, facing the fire. One chair was empty, and the other occupied. A man sat in the chair. He was ancient and seemed made of wrinkles. His large knuckled hands gripped the head of an ivory cane that he leaned on. His voice was like the low growling wind can make as it sweeps through a canyon. "Come sit, and let me get a look at you. I would take the measure of the person who threw away so much power." Milo sat in the other chair, and they stared at each other. Finally, the old man spoke again. "I was named Grissenchos by my kin, but they are long dead, and you are not kin. Call me Clapperleg instead. They called me that because of this useless left limb that does only half the work it should." I hated the name, but it fits. Milo could see that his left leg was twisted and thin. "At least you have a left leg. In the world I was born in, I didn't have one until I made it myself. I won't call you that. I'd hate to have people call me by a name like that, and I won't do it to you." The old man nodded and spit into the fire. "Well, enough, call me Sickle then. Tell me about this leg you made." Later, Milo thought it was odd that he told Sickle about his life, and how he'd made his first prosthetic leg and better ones later. But at the moment, sitting in the chair before the fire, it felt like the right thing to do. When he was done talking, Sickle was silent for a bit, and then told a story of his own. "My grandfather was a bonemancer. Well, a necromancer really, because he dabbled a bit with spirits and did have a few zombies around for carrying wood and doing chores. But he loved bones, and worked with them as his material whenever he could. My father continued his work, and married a woman from a mountain tribe who had her own magic. They worked their magic in bone and ivory, creating beautiful staves, wands, dice and other magical creations. She taught him to carve the runes and how to throw the knucklebones to see a glimpse of the future. I learned from them both. I lived a long time and learned much. Eventually I got it in my head to live past my long years. And so I did favors for one of the hidden lords. They were well pleased and loaned me the services of their weaver. From bits of my soul, and the sinews of the beasts in the nightmare realm we wove the tattered cloth you wear now. Within it, I built my library, and when I no longer had the strength to walk back from death, I retreated here to read my books and sit by the fire. Imagine my surprise when others came. Each was a wizard who used the bones for power. Each found the bone-ruined cowl and died wearing it. Their power and mine aided whoever the latest owner was. Some faded away eventually. A couple accepted oblivion and stepped into the void. And now comes a wet behind the ears apprentice who washed out their blood and freed them all. Maybe that's best. I was tired of talking to them. The rat kin was the worst. No, not just because he was a rat kin. I can see you share that much with him. He just wouldn't shut up about his great plans and glorious destiny. We were all laughing when you defeated his fetid corpse. So, it's just the 2 of us now. An old ghost far past his time with nowhere to go. And a young man new to this world who made his own leg and tail before coming here. Tell me what you want to do, young Milo." Sickle picked up a metal scoop and threw more chunks of bone onto the fire from the bucket next to him. Without asking, Milo could sense they were whalebones, heavy with oil. Milo thought for a moment. "I want to go places and see things. I can't do that in my other body, but I can here. I want to explore the caves and mines, and find secrets." Sickle nodded. "Well, enough. And what about the bones and the magic? Do you want to learn more of those? Or will you just wear that old dish rag around because you like the color?" Milo looked around the room. Many of the larger bones were carved with runic script he couldn't read. This room held a lot of secrets. "I want to know the secrets you have here, too." Sickle nodded. "You might do then. But off with you for now. Go find a bone of your own to add to my library. You have completed the quest. Free the captured souls. You have gained 5 core skill points. You have been given the quest. One of your own Sickle has tasked you with finding an old bone to add to the library. Return to him when you have one. Success. Access to the books in the library and lessons in bonecasting. Failure. A missed opportunity." Chapter 20. Accidents. Several alarms were going off as Milo got out of the pod. Most were simply steady beeps, directing his attention to problems, but one was an insistent sound coupled with a red strobe light. A quick check showed the obvious problem of no power for many of the systems. Power wasn't cheap, and one of the huge costs of keeping the habitats going was a steady supply of energy. The government supplied a minimum amount needed to keep things going. Any industry or business setting up paid for the additional power they needed. A sudden drop in power could be any number of things, from someone pirating the power in E-section, the supply being rationed from the city, or a breakdown in distribution. Milo eliminated most of these immediately. E-section had plenty of power coming in, the problem was someone tapping into it illegally. From the location, Milo immediately suspected Kaminsky. Sure enough, several more industrial bays were now housing his operation. The amount of power he was using was more than was allocated to Section E, and other machinery was being shut down to compensate. Food processing hadn't worked for an hour, air was moving sluggishly in the whole system. Milo started trickling power into the system from the storage system to compensate. That would buy him time, but he knew things were just going to get worse and worse. Kaminsky must be bribing someone. A lot of someones. It was obvious to Milo that he would have to do something. He had been undecided about trying to notify someone about Kaminsky before. Now it had to happen. Whether or not it brought inquisitive people into Section E was a moot point. They'd be here sooner or later when the system started failing. Better to somehow get him kicked out of here before then. Security cameras showed Milo what was new. The first was another shipment of the old defective pods, and space to accommodate more people working in them. But the main power hogs were the row upon row of servers and the cooling systems they needed. Cryptocurrencies were one of the main monetary systems in the world. 2 of the industrial bays were being set up to house a massive server farm. The combined power drain, heat pollution, and water needs for the workers would all overload what was left of Section E's mechanical systems. Milo started observing Kaminsky in real time, while running the security tapes, looking for information on what he was setting up. Kaminsky seemed to be constantly on his phone. Before every call he was punching in codes, often cursing when he got them wrong. 3 times he ran a cable from his phone to one of the computers or to the MKVI iPod. He was obviously trying to set up a link to his systems from somewhere else. Milo couldn't access his phone, but he'd long ago hacked Kaminsky's computers. Looking at it from that end, he could see that in order to access information on another network, the pod and his computers needed to be connected to his phone for the access codes. Kaminsky wasn't good at this, but didn't trust his techs to do the work. He fumbled with it for hours before he got things set up correctly. Milo could see a huge amount of information coming from somewhere. Kaminsky's employers? Their main network? Milo needed that phone, which currently was sitting on a small table next to the Mark VI iPod, in a room with 20 people, some of which were heavily armed. A diversion was needed. A messy one. Carbon monoxide monitors were a very common safety device in the habitats, especially in industrial areas. The colorless, odorless gas could kill hundreds of people if it went undetected too long. At 10:38, about an hour after Milo exited his pod, 47 separate CO sensors started blaring their alarms in the rooms that housed the MK3 pods, and the sleeping quarters of the off-duty workers. Techs raced to find the problem, and some of the guards accompanied them to keep the mob of workers under control. The gas was detected, but the source wasn't found. If anything, it was coming from several places. Things got worse when something hot started a small fire in a trash receptacle, which triggered sprinkler systems. Water sprayed out in several rooms, one of which was the newly installed server center. Several machines were total losses as they shorted out before power could be turned off. A minute later, one of the jury-rigged coolant lines that had been hastily installed in the ceiling came uncoupled. Someone hadn't tightened the clamps holding 2 hoses together correctly and the pressure broke the joint. High-pressure cooling fluid sprayed all over the area below it, which included the MK7 pod. By some luck, as the hose jerked around from the spewing fluid, the pod itself wasn't hit, but the area around it burst into flames. Cooling fluid is highly flammable. Something must have caused a spark. In the heavy smoke and flames, no one noticed a metal cable about an inch wide snake out of the ceiling, uncouple Kaminsky's phone, and then drag the item back into the ceiling above the pod. The tendril reappeared a moment later with what might have been a duplicate of the phone, but was actually a quickly made plastic casing filled with easily melted electronic components. The sacrificial duplicate was placed in the phone's location, and a moment later burst into flames as coolant fluid sprayed down on it. Before the emergencies had been dealt with, Milo had the real phone in his workshop and was carefully taking it apart, bypassing its security, and making it a part of his system. He had logs of all the calls placed in the last year, all of the codes and passwords. By tomorrow he would know more about who Kaminsky was working for, and what he had been trying to set up. Kaminsky was furious, screaming at everyone. How the hell could people be so stupid? Yes, he'd wanted things set up as fast as they could. And yes, he may have ignored a few recommendations the technicians had made, but still, they should have been more careful. They had days of cleanup to do. He'd lose at least a week getting things back to normal. But no one had died. The authorities didn't even know anything had happened, and nothing essential had been destroyed. Until one of the techs handed him a blackened bit of plastic and metal that he recognized as the high-tech communications device his employers had trusted him with. He screamed at the techs to fix it, but even he knew that wasn't happening. It was falling to pieces, the circuitry totally fried and crumbling. Things couldn't get any worse.